So the clinical trials are funded by the industry. The medical journals are receiving money from the industry to buy the reprints of the magazine. What about the FDA? What role do they play in looking after my best interest to make sure that anything that I consume is safe and effective? What's their role?
Half of the FDA's budget is paid directly by pharma through user fees, which are incurred during the patent process. So the FDA is completely a creature of the pharmaceutical companies. When 50% of your budget is paid, you can't afford not to approve a drug because you might not be able to make your own payroll. They think of these companies as clients.
Remember also that the executive leadership of the FDA comes from pharma and then goes back to pharma. Same as the USDA comes from the food industry, goes back to the food industry, known as agency capture, written up numerous times in many journal articles. The Economist has done a whole thing on elite capture. The bottom line is the culture at the FDA is one of, we have to make nice. They are not the big stick. And remember that the enforcement arm of the FDA and the USDA, for that matter, is the Department of Justice. And they're, kind of busy, chasing drones and, other stuff.
So I had a unique opportunity. I was at a faculty ethics seminar at Harvard in 2003, maybe. And Janet Woodcock, who has been the acting director of the FDA for the last couple of years, and who was at the time the director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which approves new drugs, was there. And I asked her as meekly as I could, why the FDA allowed the Journal of the American Medical Association to publish an article about Celebrex, which is a weaker cousin of Vioxx. Right. Why the FDA allowed that article to get published in JAMA when the FDA knew, the FDA reviewers wrote very clearly that the article in JAMA was based on only the first 6 months of the study, which claimed to show that Celebrex had an advantage of being gentler on the stomach. But it was a 12-month study. And the second 6 months neutralized the benefit, and there was no benefit for the 12 months overall. So I said, Dr. Woodcock, in all humility, why didn't the FDA step in here and tell the American people and the doctors that that article was not accurate? And I knew she knew it was not accurate because the FDA reviewers were very clear about that. And she said, it's not the FDA's job to correct the literature. We don't do that.
What is ghostwriting, and how does this come into play?
So ghostwriting is when an industry shill manipulates and massages the data and phrases the article line by line, and then the industry hires the author to affix his name for a large fee. That's the way it works. 95% of all medical journal articles are ghostwritten by industry. I mean, it's hate to tell you, but
99% of bills introduced into Congress are ghostwritten.
Yeah, I can imagine. The thing about this is the FDA covers both the food and the drugs, obviously, and the FDA has a $5 billion budget, but the drugs, the medical industry that the FDA supervises is $4 trillion, and I don't know how big the food industry is. So they've got jobs that they can't possibly do. I mean, they're not big enough. And regulators, they tend to get co-opted like this. Regulatory capture is a real thing, and it's happened in the financial services industry. Obviously, that's the classic example that everybody knows about.
So there was a wonderful study that was published in the New England Journal that looked at the terms of the research contracts between academic medical centers and the drug companies. And it showed that 50% of those contracts gave the drug company the right to write up the study, and the academic authors of the study were given the privilege of reviewing what was written, but no authority to change it.
the only authority they have is to remove their name. And then they don't get the
Correct.
money.
Correct.
What does AMC stand for?
Academic Medical Center.
So can you repeat what you just said again?
So the academic medical centers used to do 80% of the drug company's clinical research back in 1991. That changed very quickly. By 2004, they were only doing 26% of the pharmaceutical company's research. The drug companies pulled the research out of the academic medical centers, and they gave it to the contract research organizations, private research companies who worked for their client pharmaceutical companies. So the academic medical centers had a problem. They lost a lot of their money, their research money. In order to maintain the 26% that they still had, they had to negotiate research contracts with the drug companies on the drug companies' terms, or the drug companies would pull yet more money out of the academic medical centers. So that shows that when you look at those contracts between the pharmaceutical companies and the academic medical centers, 50% of those contracts say that the drug company has the right. This started as a discussion about ghostwriting. It's ghostwriting. 50% of those contracts say that the drug companies can ghostwrite those articles, and the academic researchers don't have the authority to change them. They can suggest changes. And as Dr. Yoho said, the only authority that the academic authors have is to resign.
I agree with you, Dr. Abramson. Everything you said is true. However, there's another piece to that puzzle that has to be added to the mix, and that is the fact that back in 1990s, when as you said, 80% or so of studies were done in academic medical centers. That was in the days when we actually had clinical research centers. We had the infrastructure and the capabilities to be able to do those studies in academic medical centers. Over the course of the 1990s and 2000s, clinical research centers around the country were closed in order to save money. And ultimately, back in 2003, the CRC concept was basically turned into, quote, the CTSI, the Clinical Translational Science Institute, where basically no drug studies could be done that came from outside, only studies that individual principal investigators in that university was sponsoring themselves, A studies down to D studies. And I know because I got caught in some of that as well. So the bottom line is, it is true what you say about the pullout of pharma from those medical centers, but the medical centers had a lot to do with why that happened.
And now let me ask you a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Doesn't when we talk about translational medicine, we're talking about academics who used to not be profit driven, but driven by the idea of pushing back the boundaries of our knowledge. The purpose of translational medicine is not very far from the purpose of the drug company research. Is to translate science into money.
Indeed. This was Elias Zerhouni's thing, when he assumed the head of the NIH, before Francis Collins. And, basically, they turned it into a profit-making venture.
Right. Let's be sure Stephen understands what a contract research group is. And so, Stephen, this might be some group in India that you've met on the internet that will supply you with results that you don't even know whether they're freaking. There may be one person in a room, in some basement with a baseball cap on his head. I mean, it's that bad. And if they supply results that are contrary to the pharmaceutical company's wishes, they never get hired again. So, I mean, I'm exaggerating for emphasis, but that's the level of, that's what our pharmaceutical trials have degenerated into. Is it 75%, John? It's contract research groups. I mean, what is it now?
74, yeah.
Oh, God. So there's no control over that by anyone outside of the,